Welcome to Shelf Talkers, a podcast from Village Well Books and Coffee in downtown Culver City. Welcome back to Shelf Talkers. This is Jennifer Casper, founder and owner of Village Well. We are a third place dedicated to welcome, comfort, inspiration, and connection, and Shelf Talkers is our podcast in which we talk to authors and readers about books. I'm here with Judith Martin Straw, my co-host this week. Judith is publisher and editor of Culver City Crossroads and also a bookseller here. This week's guest is Jesse Katz, a Pulitzer Prize winner and author of The Rent Collectors. The Rent Collectors tells the story of Giovanni, a Los Angeles gang member tasked with killing a street vendor. When Giovanni shoots his target but leaves him alive, a stray bullet tragically takes the life of a nearby baby. In the aftermath, Giovanni's gang tries to kill him, but he survives the attempt and sets his sight on bringing the gang down. It's a great read, one of my favorite kinds of books to highlight because it gets us to see and understand important parts of our city that we don't see very often. We had a fascinating conversation with Jesse, touching on his research for the book, the history of street vending in Los Angeles, and issues with the criminal justice system. Now here's our interview with Jesse Katz, and heads up, this episode contains descriptions of murder. Welcome, Jesse. It's great to see you here today.
It is great to be back in your wonderful bookstore and cafe and community hub.
Thank you so much. So Judith and I are doing our inaugural interview where it's just she and I, and taking over from Julia and Jared, who created the format, which we're going to stick to the format that they initiated, which is starting out with the question of shelf talkers. So, you know, shelf talkers are the little cards you see in the store, enticing you to pick up a specific book. And we'd like to ask you if you could compose a shelf talker for your book that we're here to talk to you about today, The Rent Collectors.
So I've spent the last 6 years getting to know the kid who was involved in 2 botched murders. He was the perpetrator of one of them, and he was the survivor of the other. And what he's been through and the story he has to tell is just kind of beyond belief. Mm-hmm. And I was just captivated, fascinated, alarmed by everything he had to share. And on a deeper level, it's recounting a tragic crime that occurred in the MacArthur Park area in 2007. But it was really important to me that it not just be, a dramatic retelling of the violence, that I wanted it to be contextualized and presented in a way that offered some deeper understanding. So it's also about all the policy choices and systemic breakdowns and, familial fragmentations and just, internalized anger of an adolescent kid that led up to this tragic moment, and that it just didn't happen in isolation.
Yeah, putting things in context is really, it's a lovely part of what you do with introducing us to the characters, so to speak. I mean, these are real people, but we get to, really see a lot of them. So you won an award for food writing back in 2006. Writing about taco trucks for the James Beard Foundation honored you for that. So tell us about how you got from taco trucks to Rent Collectors.
Thanks for bringing that up. That's one of my proudest moments.
It should be.
Say you won a James Beard. And it's not what I'm really known for, but, I was at Los Angeles Magazine and given a tremendous amount of latitude. And I just felt that there was something about Los Angeles culture, our kind of social geography, that was defined by taco trucks. And it was, again, one of those things where it externally. You might have your favorite taco truck, certainly see taco trucks, the way they're decorated with the lighting and the murals and all that. But we don't really have a very good sense of the people inside the taco truck. Who are they? What are their lives about? What are their dreams? What sort of just insane risks have they taken to invest their life savings in this mobile truck? And so I found a gentleman in East LA who allowed me to spend time with him. I went out with him every day for about 6 weeks, ate a lot of tacos.
Got some cilantro on your fingers, yeah.
it was just it was a really wonderful experience, but it kind of attuned me a little bit to the struggles of street vendors and the way that their offerings are celebrated,
Yeah.
but also misunderstood and sometimes stigmatized. And when I heard about this crime taking place in MacArthur Park, and the fact that it involved a street vendor,
Right, yeah.
and that he was being extorted by a gang, it just it made me feel that it was going to lead to a deeper discussion of the city we live in.
Reading the book, I definitely learned a lot about how gang economics work and the street vendor economy. So can you tell a little bit more about what happens in the story and some of the questions? The ones that I thought were most interesting was the person who commits the murder, who's the main character in your story, Giovanni. He is joining a gang. And so the first thing you explain, which is so interesting, is why does he want to join a gang? And then the other one is there's a baby that's killed in the crossfire. Nobody was aiming at the baby, but like, why was the baby in that unlikely position where a gang bullet might come across his path?
Yeah. So you have in the MacArthur Park area, just a highly organized, super hierarchical gang. Most gangs are pretty, it's just disorganized crime and very ephemeral. This is just a unusually concentrated group of people in an incredibly resilient enterprise. And I think some of those reasons are because it fills a void. As negative and destructive as the gang can be, it's also kind of serves a rational purpose in terms of people wanting to have power and some control over their economic lives. And of course, it gives young people, needy, naive young people, a sense of belonging. In this case, the gang was extorting undocumented street vendors in the MacArthur Park area and charging them rent to be on a patch of public sidewalk. And we have a vendor from Mexico City, a guy named Francisco Clemente, very proud but also stubborn man who decides he's not going to pay his rent. And he owes the gang, $40 or $50. And the fact that the gang needed to then respond to that, his defiance with violence was... I also thought that was a window into something more interesting.
Yeah.
If it was just, gang on gang violence, our neighborhood's badder than your neighborhood, and we're gonna shoot bullets over that. It's hard to find something illuminating in that.
Yeah.
It kind of takes you down a dead end. And the fact that this had economic ramifications was really interesting to me. Also, the fact that the city of LA criminalized street vending, so the street vendors were also being harassed, pursued, ticketed, cited, arrested by the Los Angeles police.
So Francisco was a street vendor, and he had this woman working for him.
They were friends.
Okay.
Francisco had met two women while he was out on the streets, originally in the downtown LA area. And one of them was named Jessica, and he developed a relationship with her, and she became his partner. And Jessica's roommate was a woman named Daniela. And during this time, as they were getting to know each other, Daniela became pregnant. And the father was just not around. And so Francisco and Jessica kind of took care of Daniela. And Francisco, I know, personally felt responsible for both of them. And just before this incident happened, Jessica became pregnant with Francisco's baby. So there were these two little ones coming. So whatever they were doing out on the streets to try to make a buck suddenly had a more urgent quality to it. This is going to feed not 3 people, but 5 people now. And Daniela had her baby in August 2007. And 3 weeks later, she was out there with her little boy, Luis
amazing.
Angel Garcia. He was 23 days old on this night, and it was the night before Mexican Independence Day. It's actually Central American Independence Day that evening, and the streets were just packed at MacArthur Park. It's about 9 o'clock at night, wall to wall people. And, it's intense out there. There's noise and exhaust and money changing hands. And, it's not where you would bring your newborn infant if you had some other choices. But Daniela did not have health insurance, and she did not have childcare, and she really didn't have a safety net of any kind. So she needed to be out there in order to take care of her baby. And there's her baby swaddled in a stroller right next to her, well, between her and Francisco.
So the baby's in the stroller on the eve of Mexican Independence Day in MacArthur Park, in an environment where most of us wouldn't bring a baby, and most of us who have given birth probably wouldn't be out 23 days later in that environment, certainly not working if we didn't have to.
And Francisco, if he had it to do over again, he surely would have taken a different path.
Yeah.
But, the gang came and demanded money from him. And he's just very proud. He's hardworking. That money was going to go to these, 2 babies, one who's right there and another on the way. And I think of his courage, standing up to this gang saying, heck no, these streets belong to all of us. I mean, who does that,
He wasn't naive.
No, it was there was a pride. There's a little bit of, masculine bluster too,
For sure.
You also talk about Francisco really being a very faithful and pious individual, that he felt that he was doing the right thing and therefore God was on his side.
I think maybe some of his faith came after the incident. Not that it wasn't there, but he really then had to examine his life.
Yes, exactly.
And why is he even alive today?
Yeah.
And that's where I think he began looking to sort of divine answers for that. But, the gang's running a multi-million-dollar extortion scheme in MacArthur Park. They're extorting the street vendors, they're extorting the fake document vendors, they're extorting the drug dealers, they're extorting the gamblers, whatever is going on there, they're taking a cut of that action. And you can't have somebody unwilling to pay if you hope to maintain that regime.
That's a very bad example.
It invites a mutiny, right? And you start to think about any organization or government or whatever it may be, that's always going to fight for its own, self-perpetuation.
Sure.
And so the gang needed to send a message to Francisco and all the other vendors, and that was to kill him. And of course, the older, savvier members of the gang who are really running this enterprise, they don't want to do something like that.
Sure.
Right? That's risky. It's messy. They're thinking the big thoughts, so they need somebody who's expendable to go out and do this dirty work. And that's where Giovanni comes in. He had been around the gang for 2 or 3 years at that point. He was kind of formally initiated when he was about 15, but he was just never what you would call a hardcore gang member. He wasn't that's not who he was. He really wanted to hang out. He wanted to belong. Yeah, he probably wanted some quick money, but his home was so fractured and turbulent that the gang it's sad to me, but was a more stable social institution than he had under his own roof.
Yeah, and he's very aware that he's on the margins. He knows he's connected, but he's not really connected. That's what makes him hungry for the approval and the sure, I'll take it on.
Yeah, and they're using that against him. They're constantly telling him that they think he's a snitch. They think he has some sort of relationship with the police, and he's giving away the gang's secrets. And Giovanni, of course, told me that wasn't true. I couldn't find any evidence of it anywhere. And I think it was just like a troll.
Sure.
They were using this
it's a taunt.
to like,
yeah.
Okay, now prove to me you're not a snitch.
Yeah.
So that became, leverage to try to get him to do anything.
Yeah.
And on September 15th, 2007, they bring Giovanni to 6th Street, 6th and Bonnie Bray, and they put a gun in his hands, and they say, you got to go shoot a man. And it's kind of incredible to me that, Giovanni doesn't know who he's supposed to shoot. He's never seen him before. He's never had any interaction with him. He doesn't have any beef with him. He knows the gang does. And so he literally needs somebody to walk him down the street and point out the vendor and say, that's him. That's the guy.
Well, isn't he also aware at that time that if he doesn't commit this murder, he's the next victim? He'll be gone.
I mean, at that point, there probably is no backing out.
Yeah.
You've crossed this line already. They've put a gun in your hand. I mean, at a minimum, you're ostracized from the gang. You are ousted at that point. And I don't think there's no real equilibrium at that point. They are probably after you. He felt that they would come harm him or harm his mother.
Well, and people throughout the book talk about the immense reach that this organization has, that they're in every city, they're in every state, they will find you, they will figure it out, they will know where you are. Even whether it's true or not, the people connected here feel that it's absolutely inescapable.
Yeah, there are tens of thousands of members of this gang in Southern California. They are in every quadrant of greater Los Angeles, to the point that they have a north, south, east, and west segments. And even those areas are broken down into, dozens of individual cliques. But as you mentioned, all across the country and throughout Latin America as well. So Giovanni then has to do this terrible thing. And, to try to put ourselves in his shoes at that moment, he wants to do it. He doesn't want to do it, but he wants to receive the benefits of having done it.
He doesn't want to kill, but he wants to win.
Yeah, he wants to show
be accepted.
He's
again.
capable of this. He's not squeamish. He's not the kind of person who's going to back out when the chips are down. The gang can depend on him. And he, I kind of use this word, cautiously, but he kind of does it the right way. You're not supposed to do a drive-by shooting because that's reckless. He takes the gun and walks right up to his target. He faces his victim, man to man, a few feet away, and he opens fire. And look, that does, within that world, that takes a lot of courage to do that, and not. It's much easier if you're in a moving car, just sort of firing indiscriminately. So in the gang world, that was a way for him to earn his bona fides. 4 bullets strike Francisco. He's gravely wounded and was probably touch and go that night. They had to do emergency surgery on him. Fortunately, Francisco survived. He's alive today. He still has 2 bullets in him, one in his back, one in his jaw, that are just in areas that are too sensitive to remove.
Yeah.
And it kind of trips me out, and I know it does him, talking to him, and he'll touch the spot, and to think this thing that was supposed to kill you, you're carrying it around in your flesh and bone every day, is just a sort of a crazy thing to coexist with. But look, if Giovanni had killed Francisco that night, I don't think we would be talking about any of this. I hate to say, it would have just been chalked up to the vicissitudes of the streets of MacArthur Park or greater Los Angeles. And but one of those bullets, not really sure how, but one of them, whether it ricocheted or it hit Francisco first and was deflected, ends up striking this 23-day-old baby. Giovanni, runs, he hands off the gun. He did not realize that any of that happened. He thought he succeeded.
Sure.
And it's only the next day that he's told, hey, guess what? The vendor is alive and the baby is dead. Yeah. And he can't believe it. I know what I did. Why are you trying to put this scandalous thing on me when I know what I did? But the next day he turns on the news and sees the mayor offering a $75,000 reward for information, leading to the arrest of the killer of this baby. And he realizes, like, my God, that's me.
Yeah.
I did that. And he just doubles over in tears and is beside himself. I don't know. Do we sympathize with him at that moment or not? He he did a terrible thing and he did a reckless thing, and something like that was likely to occur if you opened fire on a crowded street. But it was really important to him that people know it was unintentional. He never saw the baby.
One of the things that is so compelling about how you tell the story is that there are so many points where it's just that slender twist of fate, this minor detail that just went in another direction that suddenly changes everything. Mm-hmm. And I think when we kind of step back and notice that again, as you said, there wouldn't be a book, there wouldn't be a story if it had all gone as planned. But noticing that kind of that tiny little ray of light where suddenly people see things differently.
Well, and I'll take that even a step further, because he committed a crime that was so atrocious, it's part of what caught my attention. Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, let me fill in one gap. It's so atrocious that it requires his own gang to now kill him. Mm-hmm. He needs to be sacrificed in order for the gang to be in good standing with the higher level of organized crime within the prisons, the Mexican mafia.
Right.
And so, this insane scene where he's brought down to Mexico and he's kind of has a night of partying, and then the next night they put him in a car and drive over a windy mountain road between Tijuana and Mexicali, and they put a rope around his neck and they strangle him, and they hear something snap and they feel his body go limp. They throw him off the side of a cliff. I mean, my God, this is like out of the movies. And the fact that he survived that is just incredible. I mean, he shouldn't have survived it.
And you did make the point that maybe it was out of the movies, that you thought it was he was playing the scene with Luca Brasi from The Godfather.
I mean, why
wouldn't he shoot him?
Yes, it would be so much easier to just shoot him and be done with it, right?
Yeah. So what was what melodrama were they involved with?
Who knows? Yeah. But they obviously felt that was the way to handle it, right? Just strangle him. Had they not done that,
again, the little twist, the tiny little change,
but here's this, this kid who rises from the dead, to haunt his former gang. And then that creates again, the opportunity, the interest in me to find out, well, who is this kid? Mm-hmm. Who is this boy who shoots a baby? Who is this boy who survives a strangulation attempt? Who is this boy that decides he's going to testify against the very people whose approval and love he desperately sought? And so that the fact that these terrible things take place just by, a hair is also created the conditions for exploring who Giovanni is. Mm-hmm. And I hope that inquiry, takes us to much more interesting and hopeful places.
Mm-hmm. So when you are meeting Giovanni and he's in prison and he's starting to kind of climb the ladder back, he's getting his GED, he's taking some community college classes. What do you feel was what lit the spark in him to try to fulfill his higher sense of purpose?
Yeah, I think there were a couple things that took place. First of all, California went through a really dramatic rethinking of crime and punishment a decade or so ago. The pendulum today might be swinging back towards tougher on crime, at least here in LA.
We'll find out in November on the ballot.
We will, but I think we know where it might be headed. But the legislature's still been implementing some more progressive reforms. And in 2015, they passed a bill that accelerated, expanded parole opportunities for youthful offenders. And at that point, Giovanni was in year 7, 8 of his incarceration, thinking, he's just 51 years. It's just it's incomprehensible if you're 18, 19, 20 years old.
Yeah, it's abstract.
And suddenly he's guaranteed a parole hearing in his 15th year of incarceration. You're not guaranteed of getting out. Who knows what the outcome is, but you get to go to the board and make your case. And so I think a switch, flipped at that moment. Giovanni felt for the first time, hey, I might actually get out. There's actually value in me trying to do the right thing while I'm incarcerated. If it's 50 more years, why bother? Might as well just, be a knucklehead in here. He wasn't disruptive or anything, but he wasn't really doing much to better himself that first decade or so. So I think that created one opportunity. And honestly, I'm very cautious about inserting myself into the story. If you read the book, I'm not in it at all.
It isn't. Yeah, it's not what we think of as new journalism, where you're telling the tale from that point of view.
But I do think my presence in his life had a beneficial effect. One of the things that had been missing all along was a stable male figure who could be kind of a source of wisdom and encouragement and good advice. And I'm interested in Giovanni. I wanted to learn who he is and everything that led up to all this moment. But I'm also his conversation partner. And I would buy him books. I would send him books, interesting things to read, whether it's Father Greg's Tattoos on the Heart or Yuval Harari's Sapiens, or just things to open his horizons and give us stuff to talk about.
Yeah.
But what about the biggest gift you gave him, which is telling his story? Here's a kid who probably never felt he was understood or seen.
I think that's very well said. One of the things we did, I would ask him a lot of questions in person, but I can't, when I go visit in the prison, at any point, I can't bring in recording equipment.
Right.
And I can't even bring in pen and paper.
Ooh.
So there's a real high degree of difficulty in terms of like organizing my brain for the conversation and then emerging 3-4 hours later and trying to download that stuff when I get back to my car.
Yeah.
One of the things that I started to do, partly just, to protect myself, was to write him a letter after I saw him and say, hey, it was really great to see you. When you said A, B, or C, I thought that was really moving. Can you expand on that a little bit more? And so then he would write me a letter sort of, giving me a fuller view, his real account of, a person, a moment, whatever it may be. And then I would make a copy of that letter for myself and send him back the original. So he was literally building an archive of his story.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it was kind of a physical thing that he could hold on to, but it also, slowly over the years began to fill in the gaps of his, of his childhood, of his parents' lives, of their journeys to the U.S. A lot of things that he just didn't know or that weren't shared with him because of all the tumult under his roof. And so I do think today he has a narrative that I guess we discovered together, that I think he can go before a parole board or whoever it might be and really talk about who he is.
Well, it's one of the very common situations in any immigration that when you're leaving whatever disaster, civil war or famine or something, and you're coming to another country, you're leaving a whole lot of family stories behind you that might never, ever get told. So having him, be able to like reweave those threads in his particular, tapestry, that's just a lot of value there.
If I can add in my first book, a memoir called The Opposite Field, I tell a little bit of my mom's immigrant journey to the U.S. She was the child of Russian refugees.
There you go.
Born in Germany during World War II, fled to France as the Nazis came through, and ultimately at age 6 had to leave France, cross the Pyrenees on foot, and take a boat to America. And so, immigrant stories, refugee stories, resonate personally with me.
Yeah.
But in writing that book, I needed to go back and discover some things about my mom and the way I was raised that I didn't know before.
Yeah.
And I asked a lot of questions about what those times were like. And her memory was a little hazy, and there were things I think she didn't want to remember. And
Yes.
I did a lot of research, and I ultimately went to France and was able to retrace her steps walking across the Pyrenees. I know we're getting a little far afield here, but it's the way that we carry stories, but we don't always know them in their entirety. Another really profound thing that happens about halfway through my research, I discovered that his mom had never visited him in prison.
Oh, wow.
And I found that sort of incomprehensible. Why, how can this go on? And it was a combination of some things on her record, minor things, but she was embarrassed by them and didn't want to bring them up. And she also didn't understand fully that she needed to disclose them on the visiting questionnaire. And so she tried several times and she kept getting denied, and nobody explains why you're being denied. And she kind of just gave up, she threw up her hands and and I'm thinking, were you thinking you will never see your son again? I mean, my goodness. And so again, I don't really bring myself into this moment in the book, but I offered to help her with her visiting questionnaire and figure out the details of this offense that was tripping her up. And through that process, she got approved and as a visitor. And the visit that I describe in the book, I am with her on her first visit, seeing Giovanni, and she has not held him in her arms at that point for a decade.
Yeah, it was a dramatic story. And that was really touching.
Yeah, I mean, I cried when I wrote that section, as she's sort of experiencing this distance close, but also at the same time, the years that they've lost. And she's asking him, I look old. I look old, don't I?
Oh.
And Giovanni's like, no, Ma, you look beautiful.
Yeah.
And I mean, that I felt so privileged to be with them.
Well, and again, think of how many hundreds, thousands of people in that same prison situation just got turned away and didn't have a connecting point, had nobody could help them, nobody they could ask, and they don't know what they're doing wrong. You don't know what you don't know. And her fear of authority, I'm sure, was just, okay, then I guess I'm walking away and I'm never seeing my son.
Yeah. So, and we've continued to go together to visit him, and she's able to now go by herself.
Good.
Also,
now, have they read the book?
The family, many people in the family have read the book and have responded favorably. I was a little nervous about that.
I'm sure.
You just never know.
Right.
And you are laying a lot of secrets bare, but I also think for siblings, cousins, aunties, uncles who were part of their world, they also had questions that were unanswered. And in some cases, they didn't know how they should feel about Giovanni. They were somewhat estranged from him and, maybe embarrassed or ashamed that, our loved one committed this heinous act. And I think the book in some ways gave them back Giovanni. Like they could embrace him again as, a brother, nephew, or whatever it may be.
Is your publisher planning a Spanish translation?
I sure hope so.
You have an audience out there.
Yeah, for sure, especially in this area.
Giovanni himself is in the process of digesting it.
Okay.
So you can't send hardcover books to prison. So what I've been doing, talk about degree of difficulty. I've printed the book out as a Word document.
Got it.
Shrunk the font, and but also you can put no more than 10 sheets of paper in an envelope at a time. Again, to make it easier for them to.
The regulations are so intense. Yeah.
So I've been sending Giovanni like a serialized version.
Right.
Of
Well,
his
Charles
life.
Dickens. Yeah.
30 plus
Oh my
envelopes.
God.
He has them all. There was one other detail that I really do want to praise my publisher, Astor House, for. Because the book deals so much with Latino and Spanish-speaking culture, it was really important to me that be integrated as organically as possible in the telling. So, as you know, there's quite a bit of untranslated Spanish in the book. I think it's from context, you can figure most of it out.
Oh, absolutely.
But I'm not putting things in parentheses to tell you what that word just was. And I'm also not italicizing the Spanish words. And that was important to me, that these words just be sort of seamlessly integrated into the fabric of the book, as I think those words are really integrated into the fabric of the place we live.
Yeah.
And Astra House embraced that idea. I'm really grateful for that. And one other thing, in the endnotes where I have my sources, anybody who I interviewed in Spanish, and there's about 7, 8, 9 characters where we spoke exclusively in Spanish, I have their original Spanish in the back of the book.
Oh, great. So someone
it's
can go
not
back
just
and read.
passing through my translation machine and the pages. You can see the way they actually said it.
Well, this has been a great conversation. It's been so interesting. The book was so interesting. I really encourage everyone to go out and read it. It's, it does read like a thriller. It is true crime. And you also learn a lot about sociology and psychology and Los Angeles. I loved reading it.
Thank you so much. I'm
Yeah.
really grateful to both of you, and I just love Village well.
Oh,
And
thank you.
I'm so glad I stumbled in here one day,
Yes.
unannounced, uninvited, and here we are.
How we close out these interviews is we ask our interviewees to recommend books. So do you have some books to recommend to our listeners that relate somehow to what we've just talked about?
Yeah, there were several books that were really influential as I was writing this. I did read not War and Peace,
Crime and Punishment?
Crime and Punishment.
Yeah.
I knew it was a Russian
Yeah.
novel. I have to confess I had not read it before. And so absorbing Dostoevsky as I'm doing all this was really meaningful. And I loved it. And it had a certain kind of comedy or absurdity to it that I wasn't expecting. I admire, I'm envious of Matthew Desmond.
Oh.
I thought Evicted was just ridiculously great. And I tell people, there's a book about landlords and tenants is captivating. How can that be? But Poverty by America came
I just read
out
that one,
while I was writing this. And just the idea of the criminalization of poverty. One of the motifs that kind of runs through the book is every time somebody's getting fined by our court system, I break down the fine into, this is the fine, this is the restitution, this is the security fee, this is you get a sense of people just being nickeled and dimed who can least afford it.
Yeah.
And I think that was sort of inspired by Desmond's work.
Yeah.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah.
Well, you definitely do that. You tell this story in a lot of detail in a way that helps us understand who these people are, why they did what they did, and, there, but for the grace of God, go any of us.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a real believer in journalism and storytelling where you stand in the shoes of somebody else.
Yeah.
And that means, inhabiting somebody whose life and experience is not your own and trying to do justice to that person.
Yeah. Well, you've done a great service
Yeah.
to all of us who get the opportunity to read it and learn.
Well, thanks so much.
Yeah.
Thanks for being our guest.
Thank you. If you'd like to learn more about the books mentioned in this episode, or if you want to connect with this week's guest, check out the show notes. You can also order your books online through villagewell.com. If you want to get in touch with us, our email is podcast@villagewell.com. This episode of Shelf Talkers is brought to you by Village Well Books and Coffee. It was produced and edited by Josh Stretton Carlson, and our theme music is from Noah Vickland. See you in 2 weeks, and keep reading.